this campaign, and that's how we're going to win.
Thank you all for being here and now. And also thank you to the town of Exeter for hosting us in the historic Exeter. And now I would like to bring onto the stage State Rep in 5 terms Exeter Select Woman, Julie Gilman.
Welcome to Exeter. Welcome to our town hall. Cole stole my line about it being historic, so I'm going to give you a different fun fact. Fun fact of Abraham Lincoln came to speak here, and it's reported that he had 1,000 people or more, and so they had to open the windows for the people who were outside waiting to get in. Much like tonight. I'm really proud and pleased to be here, New Hampshire being the first primary in the nation. I've heard rumors this year because states are nudging each other up and down, excuse me, that we might have our primary this December. So be prepared with your winter clothes to stand out outside. One of the things about New Hampshire is we have several causes that match up with Mayor Pete's platform and interests. And we like to, as activists, go out there and bring them and tell them to the rest of the world, tell them to the rest of the states. Don't just keep it here. That's what we do. We let them know because we run that primary first. So, a couple of those things I'm going to talk about from the town side. When the first tariffs were imposed on China, they stopped taking our recycled plastics. And this caused the cost of recycling to go up because we had to find a different solution to what to do with all those plastics that we nicely put in our bins every week. So the Waste Management Company came to our select board and said, this is what's happening, we have a choice. Change what you recycle or pay us budget a little bit more. And the select board unanimously chose that we would pay a little more so we can keep our recycling program the way it is. So that's tariffs. Another thing I think that New Hampshire is leading the way in showing how we work together and what is important to us is going to take Mayor Pete further out into the country and say, see, they did this, you can do this. I was very proud yesterday for the work that New Hampshire did at the State House. First thing, we overrode the governor's veto on repealing the death penalty. Passed a bill to establish an independent commission on redistricting. We passed a bill for background checks for purchases of Another great thing we did was to change our law back on voters' rights so that any Granite Stater who's eligible to vote can go to the ballot box and do their voting. I have 2 requests. One is I would like the people who are from Exeter to yell, I. And the people who are from away, yell, yay. Yay! The yays have it. Welcome to Exeter. It's lovely to see you all here. It's an incredible introduce to you a candidate for the presidency, Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for the warm welcome. One more time for a local and state leader, Representative Gilman. Thank you so much. I've done a lot of town halls. I love a good town hall, but this is the first time I've done a town hall in a town hall, so I'm really looking forward to what we're going to be able to cover here. This is part of a great tradition of American democracy. I have some strong feelings about democracy, but we'll come to that in a minute. First of all, I just want to share why I'm doing this, because I think a lot of folks still come to events asking that basic question of who are you and what are you doing this for? Especially because it might not be the most obvious career move for a millennial Midwestern mayor to make. But I am convinced, and everywhere I go I find others who agree, that we are living in a moment that will define how American political and social and economic life unfolds for the rest of my life. That what's at stake is not just the next 4 years, but the next 40. That we have the good and bad luck of living in one of those tender and confusing moments, like one of those blank pages in between chapters in the American story. But that means that so much is in our hands in the choices that we're about to make. Even as I speak, even now, we may well be underreacting to the seriousness of this moment. It's hard to believe, but I think we might. And it's not just this presidency, although this presidency is a shocking thing, but it's the conditions that make a presidency like the one we're living in even possible. Because a president like the one we've got doesn't even come within cheating distance of the Oval Office if everything's going along just fine. It's why we need to make sure, as we're laying the groundwork not just for a new presidency, but for a new era, that we are paying attention to the deepest values that motivate our choices. And I'm worried that these values, many of them have come to be talked about as though they are the property of the Republican Party. It's why everywhere I go, I ask people I interact with to think about the meaning of freedom. And I'm in the state that says, live free or die. We got to think about what it means to live free. And recognize that there's a lot more to living free than cutting regulations on financial institutions. Because there's a lot more than government that can make you unfree. One of the reasons we invented government as a species is that your neighbor can make you unfree. Your cable company can make you unfree if you don't have a lot of choice in the marketplace. And I contend that things like healthcare are freedom because you're not free if you're not able to go start a small business because you think leaving your old job means you would lose your insurance. That's freedom too. What we're seeing now from those in charge is there's not a lot of evidence that they're highly motivated to protect some American freedoms that we depend on. It's one reason that it is important for everybody, in particular, to be standing up for women's reproductive freedoms. I don't have to be a woman to know how important it is to American freedom that women can exercise control over their own choices and their own bodies, just like you don't have to be LGBT to know why it is wrong, just wrong, to deny same-sex couples the ability to have their children be from the same country as they are, when there are... Just like you don't have to be a person of color to be distressed by the fact that black women are experiencing death from maternal complications at 3 times the rate of white women, because if you do not have mental and physical health parity, if you do not have community and economic health parity, then you might as well be living in a different country, and you most certainly are not living free. So we're going to talk about freedom in a whole new way and remind everybody that there's so much more to it than what folks on the right have been talking about. And we're going to do the same thing about security, because it is time to put to rest the idea that patriotism belongs on one side of the aisle. When 21st century security threats include election security and cyber security, when they include security in the face of violent white nationalism, claiming lives at home and abroad, putting up a wall from sea to shining sea isn't going to take care of our security problems in the 21st century. And neither is chest-thumping militarism by somebody who used his privilege to avoid serving when it was his turn, and now seems to be setting us on a course that could lead to violent confrontation with the enemy. And if we mean business about security in all its forms, then let us finally pay attention to the military and intelligence leaders who have been telling us that climate disruption is a security issue. So many things they talk about like it's just on one side. As though freedom, as though security, as though faith belonged on one side of the aisle. I'm pretty sure God doesn't belong to a political party, and if he did, I can't imagine it would be the one that's in charge of the White House. The next president ought to be there for people of any religion and people of no religion. It's also time to remind people of faith who are motivated by that in their decisions about politics, that the traditions that tell us that we ought, and there are religious and secular traditions that tell us the same thing, that we ought to concern ourselves with the least among us, that we ought to lift up the marginalized, that we have a responsibility to heal the sick, to take care of the poor, to welcome the stranger, stranger being another word for immigrant. That moral call is not the excuse for Now, to get any of these issues right, I believe we need to pay attention to American democracy. And again, I may well be preaching to the choir because I'm in the state that gave us Granny D. And that work goes on. It turns out you cannot take for granted that America will always grow more democratic. We take steps forward and we take steps backward. And right now we're taking an awful lot of steps backward. When dollars can outvote people because of the disaster of the Citizens United decision, we have taken a step backward. We'll see what your governor does, but I'm so glad that your legislature made a decision to defend the idea that districts ought to be drawn such that voters are choosing their politicians, not the other way around. We had better depoliticize the Supreme Court before it comes to be viewed as a negative. We might even go so far as to choose our president by just counting up all the votes and giving it to the woman or the man who got the most. Now, I recognize that I'm an unlikely messenger for all of these things, but it is precisely because of my background that I think we have the opportunity to reach people in new ways. I don't know if you had a chance to see the conversation we had with people at Claremont on Fox News recently. I have no illusions about Fox News. But what I will say was, it was pretty moving to be at a Fox News event and get a standing ovation from an audience that heard me deliver the exact same message that I would deliver at a Democratic rally. People are ready to hear different kinds of voices. It's why there's an opening for somebody who maybe hasn't marinated in Washington quite as long as the tradition calls for, to be stepping up from local government. Like some of the people we've seen this evening, where you have to solve problems, where there's no alternative facts. Because if you didn't plow the street and somebody calls you on it, you can't say, oh no, it's the best street ever. You just gotta plow it. You ever heard of a city or a town shut down its government because of an ideological disagreement between the executive and the legislature? It's unthinkable, right? It's unthinkable, because among other things, we deliver water. You need water to live, so civilization would break down in about 12 hours if we didn't do it. So you just get things done. And that's what people want in Washington today, for it to look more like our best-run cities and towns before the reverse starts to happen. And I think people are ready for voices from different kinds of communities. You don't have to be from the biggest city or the most democratic stronghold in order to have something to say, especially if there's a chance to speak for a community like mine, an industrial city in the American heartland that is exactly the kind of place that this president targeted, with a message that spoke to our vulnerabilities and basically said, I'm going to save you by turning back the clock to make America great again. Now, first of all, for an awful lot of Americans, that past he's promising to take us to was not quite as great as advertised. More importantly, it doesn't work that way. That's not how South Bend changed our trajectory from a city described as dying in the national press at the beginning of the decade to one that's growing. We didn't follow that prescription for looking for greatness in all the wrong places, like you could find American greatness pickled in our past and just bring it back. If there's anything we want to emulate out of the people who came before us who were most inspiring, it is the fact that they were characterized by a focus on the future. And that's how we got here. Asking America to think about how the choices we make in 2020 and 2021 and 2024 will lay the groundwork for what America is going to look like in 2054. That's the year I plan to retire. I'll be celebrating the fact that I've reached the current age of the current president. Some of the young people in this room will be in charge. We'll be thinking about how we took the right steps to make sure that everything from our changing climate to our financial position was made better, so that our country could be one where we were proud of the chapter that we lived out through the balance of the first half of the 21st century. We can do that. We can be proud of our choices, we can be proud of our country, we can be proud of our president. We just got to make a little change. So I'm going to ask you to welcome select board member Joe Pace, who's going to help us go through the question and answers.
These questions are from you. It's important to emphasize that. I didn't write out all these cards myself in the last 2 minutes. And I do have to say that I spent 9 years on the select board here in Exeter. Now I chair the select board in Kensington. And I can't think of anyone better to be the next president of the United States than someone who has managed to balance interests and balance budgets at the local level. That's the kind of approach we need in Washington. And that's why So with no further ado, let's get to some of your questions that are written down here. We have from John in Exeter. What are your plans for addressing global warming?
Thank you. Is John here? Thank you. So, as I said, I view this as a security matter. And we can't treat it as something that's going to happen someday, somewhere, to somewhere else. Twice in my time as mayor, I found myself activating the Emergency Operations Center of the city of South Bend for a flooding event. And the crazy thing is, the first time they told me it was a 1,000-year rainfall. The next time they told me it was a 500-year storm. They happened 18 months apart. So either I'm running some crazy odds, or things are changing around us. And we see this from wildfires in California to Nebraska being underwater, all the things they warned us about. The increased frequency and severity of storms is now a life-threatening issue in our country. So what are we going to do about it? Well, we've got to take a number of steps immediately. Some things can be done with the stroke of a pen. We've got to renew the EPA's ability to regulate carbon as a pollutant, because it is a pollutant. We've got to rejoin Paris and commit to more than that, we've got to make climate diplomacy one of the cornerstones of our global presence, so that we are leading rather than being dragged to the front. By the way, when things like that matter more, if we can lead the world in that direction, then we'll be on a much stronger front foot when we're dealing with things like China. If your prestige is related and your soft power is related to how much of a leader you are on climate, that helps us compete with China on terms that we define rather than on theirs. So we have to think about that. Now, even that's not going to be enough. We are going to have to massively increase our investment in the U.S., probably at least quadruple it to north of $20 billion a year on energy storage, carbon storage, and renewable energy. We're going to have a federally funded program to help retrofit buildings in communities. Help communities become as sustainable as they can. And this is kind of how mayors think, right? We got to make it easier for mayors and counties and towns to do this, because often they lead the way, but they need more resources. And we're going to need a carbon tax and dividend. Now, this is not something politicians are supposed to do, use that T word, but it's the right thing to do. And if we do the dividend, if we rebate it out to the American people, then we can make people whole. This isn't about taking money out of the economy. It isn't about taking money out of your pocket. It's about making sure the economic signals reflect the true cost of climate disruption. We can do that in a way that actually makes most Americans more than whole, better off, a check in the mail. But if we don't do that, the economy will never catch up on its own.
This one is from Kevin, and he asks, do you support public financing of campaigns?
I do. Where's Kevin?
Is that the whole answer?
I do. And, it's easy to pick on it because it's like, well, I don't want my tax money to go to some politician I don't like. But look at where we've gotten with private financing. It's not pretty. So, and I think that's a measure that we can undertake even as we're trying to deal with dark money and corporate contributions and all the other problems that Citizens United has unleashed. There's nothing there that stops us from doing public financing. So I think it's an important step, and it's a good one to pursue even as we work to do more structural reforms to prevent dark money and other kinds of money that shouldn't be influencing our politics. Thank you.
And Kerry asks, when citizens wake up to a new outrage every day, how can we best focus our attention to do the most good?
Such a great question. Where's Kerry? Hi, thanks for your question. I think this is a vitally important question, both of political strategy, but also in terms of kind of moral moment that we're in. Because, like it or not, the president sets a certain tone and gets our attention. Half of what the presidency can do has to do with its ability to seize attention. Now, the way it's supposed to work is you use that spotlight, that podium, that bully pulpit, and you use it to direct Americans' attention toward things that matter. Or you could use it to direct attention toward yourself, which is what we've got. And it sets us up for a trap. Because a lot of things are coming out of there that are so wrong, so daily outrage, as you said, that morally we can't ignore it. If the leader of the free world tells a lie, and that's happened over 10,000 times, according to fact checkers, it's got to be corrected, it's got to be addressed, it's got to be confronted. And yet, we also can't play into this strategy where it's used to distract us from everything else. Remember, this president is exceptionally unpopular. It's also the case that the Republican agenda is exceptionally unpopular. From the fact that we're the ones trying to get you an increased wage, to we're the ones who want to deliver paid family leave, and we're the ones trying to protect health care, they're trying to take it away. And we want to do the right thing on climate, and bipartisan immigration reform is something that most Americans want to see, and even things where Democrats have been on the defensive, like gun safety reform, are actually something that the vast majority of Americans want us to do, even in the Republican Party, but not Congress, and not this president. So they need us to be thinking and talking about something else, besides those issues and how they affect us. So what I think we've got to do is, yes, quickly and emphatically correct and confront what comes out of there that's wrong. But then as quickly as possible, talk about what we could be doing that's different and how it affects you and me in our everyday lives. That's the idea of 2054. It's to remind everybody that there's a world we're building right now for what will happen as this presidency comes and goes, which sooner or later it will. And strategically, it's also why we can't spend all our time thinking up the zinger that's going to knock the president flat on the debate stage. Because any energy that goes his way, any attention that goes his way, even in the form of criticism, it's kind of like food. He just takes it in and gets bigger off of it. And we're not going to win going on his show. So yes, we got to talk about some of what's going on, but then very quickly, the overall function of our strategy for the 2020 election ought to be to pick up the remote and change the channel.
This one comes from Sarah. Do you have any plans to focus on student debt?
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah Hannah. Hi, Sarah. Are you a student?
What?
Are you a student?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so this
Well,
is
high school student.
okay, so you're kind of on the front end of this journey.
Yeah.
Let me give you the view from the other end, which is that Chaston and I have six-figure debt, largely because he made this very selfish decision to go into teaching. So this one's kind of personal for us. Now, for those of us who are already dealing with debt, I think that one thing that would make a lot of sense is if I can refinance a mortgage, you ought to be able to refinance student debt when interest rates are low. It's just kind of common sense. What we've got to do is make sure that for the next students who are coming along, you don't rack up that much debt in the first place. I think that if we're serious about this, we can make it possible for low and middle income students and people going to college for the first time in their family's history to be able to get through college debt free. I believe that we need to seriously expand Pell Grants, and maybe this time peg it to inflation so we don't have to go back to Congress every time Pell Grants aren't keeping up. I think we've got to press the states to do their part, because states have retreated from funding, and I don't need to tell you this in New Hampshire, where people are facing some of the highest in-state tuition rates in the country. And it's coming down on students more and more and making college unaffordable. That some students who really should be going to college think about whether it's even a good deal financially, which is a real problem because we're not just educating workers, we're educating citizens. And then, because I'm not promising that we can make it all the way free down to the last dollar even for the child of a billionaire, if you do face some cost, there also ought to be a loan forgiveness program that rewards involvement in public service that's a lot more accessible than that. The party is allergic to talking about religion sometimes, and part of that comes from a very good place, which is our commitment to the separation of church and state.
Yeah.
I also think it's appropriate. Sometimes the presidential campaign has been described as an MRI of the soul. And so I think as a candidate, we all got to explain how our conscience is formed and how it guides us. And I belong to a faith tradition that teaches us that the way we ought to spend our time on this earth, the road to salvation, has to do with what we can do for the least among us. And when you have somebody in an out group, and in the New Testament there's the out groups of the day are everything from lepers to actually sex workers. You don't see that phrasing used in the New Testament, but that's kind of what we're talking about. You see these tribes that aren't supposed to talk to each other. The Samaritan is supposed to be in conflict, and so on. And there's this idea, this kind of radical idea, almost scandalous idea, of looking after each other as we care for ourselves. And I think that has a lot of implications for policy. Whether our policies are geared toward taking care of those most in need. But it also has a lot of implications for our conduct. And no one stands blameless. That's one of the things we get from faith, and it's one of the things you get from common sense. It's one of the things you get from your spouse. Is an awareness that we all do a lot of good and we all do a lot of harm in our lives, but we try to lean toward the good. And part of how we can get there is by trying to live up to values like humility and decency. And it does matter what values are modeled in the old laws. And humility
This one is from another Sarah, and she asks, what do you propose to solve gun violence?
Thank you, sir. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your question. I got the best job in the world as mayor of my hometown. I'm running for the second best job in government. The worst part of that great job is when my phone goes off to let me know that we've lost somebody to gun violence. And while, thank God, we haven't had the kind of mass shooting incidents that get a lot of headlines, we have lost a mass shootings worth of young people, almost all of them young, in our state. And while I'm proud of a lot of the work we've been able to do on gun violence prevention, dealing with things like gang involvement and bringing law enforcement and the faith community and the social sector together, I also feel as if, as a city, it feels like we're fighting gun violence with a hand tied behind our back. Because the state of Indiana won't let me do anything about gun safety itself. Now, I think it's pretty clear, and it's certainly clear to most Americans, what we could be doing. Universal background checks. No-brainer. Most Americans want it, and it's embarrassing that Congress can't deliver it. disarm domestic abusers. And to try to intervene if somebody who has a mental health history that makes them a risk to themselves, that can be factored in. It's part of the red flag concept. And it can save lives. And the problem with gun suicides are a crisis too. And we've also got to look at access to weapons that I can tell you, based on my military experience, have no place on American streets in our those who are concerned about the Constitution, I would point out that we have accepted within the framework of the Second Amendment that not every common sense limitation is an infringement. And we know that because right now, we've decided to draw a line. Anybody can have a water balloon, nobody can have a nuclear weapon. So somewhere in between there, we've already decided that it is constitutional to have some kind of common sense constraints.
This one comes from Melinda, who asks, and to lower drug prices.
Thank you, Melinda.
Thank you for your service.
I appreciate it. So several things are going on that allow drug prices to be higher than they ought to be. Some of it's the behavior of drug companies. And while I have nothing against you being rewarded for inventing a miraculous drug, I very much have something against companies that purposely constrict the supply of life-saving medication or take hold of patents and then run the prices through the roof because they know they can. There ought to be a circuit breaker to stop that kind of behavior from happening. Another thing we can do is have Medicare actually allowed to use its bargaining power as a huge purchaser. Most of us think of that as common sense, but Medicare is prevented from doing it. If we did that, it would make a huge difference. And until we get that fixed, we should look at measures for reimportation of safe drugs from overseas that are more affordable. And anything else that would help us keep prices down.
I'm being told that we have time for one more, and this one seems like an appropriate one. Tina from Bedford asks, why you?
Tina here? All right, somebody will have to tell Tina about my really good reasons why I showed up. 2 reasons, because I'm going to make a really good president and because I'm going to win. So let me just give you a little ammo on the second. I think I got the room on this, but and this whole conversation has been about the first part and the kind of vision I would like to bring to the country as president. So let me say a little bit about the second part, because Democrats sometimes outthink ourselves a little bit on this topic of what's called electability. Sometimes we pick somebody who is less inspiring that we think will also be less risky, and we wind up getting somebody that's neither. And I'll give you a really interesting case study on this. My home state of Indiana, not known for electing a lot of Democrats. Matter of fact, we've only voted Democratic in a presidential election once in the last 50 years. Once since LBJ did we go Democratic. And it wasn't for Bill Clinton, and it wasn't for Jimmy Carter, and it wasn't for John Kerry. It was for Barack Obama. Now, if we were standing in a parliamentariat was getting together to decide how to game out the race in May of 2007. And they were saying, I want to find somebody so electable that they could carry Indiana. How many folks would have said, let's find this Barack Hussein Obama guy, put him on the ticket, he's going to be one of these guys. Probably not a lot, right? But the point is, you can move people. It's not just about ideology. It's not just about where your dot is on the political spectrum. It is about offering something new, offering something different. And I very much subscribe to the school of thought that looks at American history and says that we Americans have a way of choosing pretty much the opposite of whatever we just had in the presidency. If nothing else, if you take a look at us, I think it's safe to say that I represent the complete opposite of the president.
Hope that we'll be seeing you again.
You bet.
I'm going to take my bowl and let you finish up.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks again. As I leave you, I just want to say, first of all, I'm so thankful that you decided to be here to come see us. Hopefully you're moved by what you hear. I'm going to need a lot of help. And I'm counting on help from people who are moved by this idea that we can win not just an election, but an era.
You got it.
That's all. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think it was possible, even now, in our strange and dark and fractured time, to use the pulleys and levers of government, and if necessary, redesign them, to make life better in this country. And I guess what I'm getting at is that running for office is an act of hope. You don't do it unless you're filled with hope. So is helping somebody running for office. So is standing in a warm room and watching somebody speak who's running for office, or knocking on doors, or going to rallies, or persuading fellow voters to vote, or voting itself. It's all an act of hope and an act of faith that this country can be better than it is. So can I look to you as a source of hope?